Hi. So as I mentioned today, we're going to talk about how I got COVID-19. And I want to premise this entire video by saying that when I actually got COVID-19, one of the most intense experiences I had was a complete stripping of my strength. And when I talk about the stripping of my strength, I mean physical strength, mental strength, emotional strength. And I needed strength on the outside while I was ill, and I was looking desperately for it. And I found very, very little out there. I looked in mainstream media for information, and all mainstream media was talking about was death, death, dying, dying, dying. And all I could think of is that the mainstream media is willing me, someone who had COVID-19, to die. Then I turned to social media to look for some strength, anything that could just feed me with a little bit of strength while I was going through COVID-19. And I couldn't find strength there either. There was either the battle between to vaccinate or not to vaccinate, or the battle between being locked down or not being locked down, and the battle between wearing a mask and not wearing a mask. In that state of being totally stripped of everything, the one thing I felt on social media with these different battles was fear. There was a lot of fear coming from different camps, and there was no strength there for me. In fact, it felt weaker for me on social media than there was strength. So this video is all about sharing information in the hopes of giving anyone who's going through COVID-19 with strength and with real tips and techniques that's helped me move past a very, very severe state of illness to one where I am getting better and getting healthier. So let's start with my history, because there's been a lot of discussion about history and the sorts of people who are vulnerable towards getting COVID-19. So I'm a very healthy female. I'm in my 40s. I would tell people that in the last 8 years, I haven't had a sniffle. I haven't had a cold, I haven't had a cough. I've had a couple of instances of a bad tummy problem, but other than that, I have been really healthy. In fact, my husband has had some colds and coughs during this time. Not very many, maybe just 2 or 3, and I haven't had any. So it was very surprising for me when I realized that I had COVID-19. But let's talk a little bit more about that later. I'm going to continue on with my history. We lead a very healthy life. We live in a beautiful village in the English countryside. We grow quite a lot of our own vegetables. We eat mostly organic food. We eat very healthily. We bake our own breads at home. We minimize processed foods. And I exercise quite a bit. Especially during the warmer months, I would hike up and down a hill for about an hour, which is really quite invigorating. And so I was actually in a pretty good, healthy condition. We work a lot from home. So in terms of isolating ourselves from people, we do it quite naturally. We love our home. We love the quiet of the countryside. Both Andy and I adore each other's company. We've got 2 beautiful little doggies. And because we spend so much time at home, isolation isn't really a problem for us, imposed or voluntary. However, I'm guessing that one of the reasons that I got COVID-19 quite badly is because of burnout. Now, I love my work. I'm an author, I'm a therapist. I'm also a trainer, and it just fills me with so much joy. In fact, you can see 2 of my books behind me. But I've been working very hard in the last 4 years producing 2 published books, 1 soon to be published book, and online training courses. And because of this, I was severely burnt out. And so I think one of the big reasons that I actually got COVID-19 was because of my burnout. Before the government imposed lockdown in the UK, we went out 3 times. Once was for me to get my new prescription glasses and contact lenses. The second time was to groom our dogs, and the third time was to stock up on some food. It's very interesting because we have spoken to our groomer since, and she didn't get COVID-19. So I suspect that I may have either picked it up at my optometrist's or at the supermarket. So my burnout compromised my immune system so much that I just fell prey to COVID-19. It's interesting because I have asked a few doctors about my condition, my symptoms, and no one else could come up with any other reason why I got it so badly. Just to give you a perspective as well, my husband also came down with COVID-19, we think, but his symptoms were very, very mild. He was in bed for about 3 days and he shook it off immediately. My husband is in the vulnerable category of those who are supposedly will be impacted badly by COVID-19 because of his age predominantly. But I wasn't in that vulnerable category of having COVID-19, yet I got it worse than he did. Every day I was so grateful while I was sick that it was me who was going through the harsh symptoms of COVID-19 and that he was relatively healthy. For me, that was a blessing that I was so grateful for. But it was also interesting that we didn't fall in the norm of who would be severely affected by it and who wouldn't be severely affected by it. And because I was so severely affected by it, I actually now have a very healthy respect for this particular virus and the impact on the body. So let me share my symptoms with you. So I think it was around the March 30th mark when I crashed. I had severe fatigue and a very slight fever. When it first happened, I thought that it was burnout. So I was in a chipper mood. I was quite lucid. All I felt was just this deep fatigue. My muscles weren't working properly, just this deep fatigue that I've never felt before. And so I thought, well, okay, 4 years of working so hard, of pushing myself, maybe this is what a burnout feels. So during the lockdown, I will just take it easy. But it was also very interesting because my husband felt quite fatigued himself. And there was a small inkling in my belly, like a little voice in my belly saying that you have COVID-19. But my mind didn't want to believe it. My mind was like, oh, okay, how could I have got COVID-19? I lead a very healthy life. I haven't even got a sniffle for like 8 years. How could I have got COVID-19? So my mind didn't want to believe this tiny voice in my belly. So for 3 days, my husband and I were sort of laid up in bed, and he got better very quickly, but I still felt very, very fatigued. By this time, I actually felt like I had COVID-19. My head and that little voice in my tummy were in agreement, because I also had a very low-grade fever. And it was very interesting. I didn't feel any form of breathlessness, but I couldn't get out of bed. I was physically not capable. It felt like the energy had completely drained out of my body. It felt like I was running on zero battery. And for me, that was a little bit fascinating, because I'd never felt like that before. No matter how sick I'd been, I've always had a little bit of fire within me. I've always had a bit of energy. So this was the first time I'd felt that. The second thing I felt, which I thought was very, very interesting, is that I felt completely stripped of all my defenses, all my facade, all my masks, everything. All my armor had just fallen. And I felt very exposed, and I felt very vulnerable. What I find very interesting about this is that the preventative way that people are talking about to stop you from getting COVID is to wear a mask, is to put more protective gear around you, is to not come into contact with very many people, is to wear PPE. But when you actually have it, all that is totally stripped away, and I just felt completely naked and completely vulnerable. I didn't want to speak to very many people. I didn't want to reach out to many people. And the reason for this is because I was so exposed, I could feel all the energy and all the emotions of everybody around me. And so what I did was I didn't talk to very many people. I didn't email very many people. And I only watched programs that made my heart very happy, very light programs. One of the programs I watched, which was a big treat for me during this week, was Mallory Towers. Now, I have to tell you, when I was a child, I was obsessed with Enid Blyton's books. And Mallory Towers was a series of books that I was totally obsessed by. It was about girls living in boarding school in England, and all the shenanigans they get up to. So it's actually quite funny, it's quite lively. I really enjoyed it. And so, to my delight, the BBC had released the first series of the Mallory Towers while I was sick. And I was like, yes! So I was watching it. I barely felt the illness because I was watching Mallory Towers. And then obviously I went on to a show called The Gilmore Girls, which is, again, a light dramedy about a mother and her daughter and the shenanigans they get up to as well. So this was basically how I was keeping myself occupied, because the shows were so light and I could just absorb that very light energy, very funny as well, for a lot of the times that it sustained me. However, if I turned to the newspapers, everything was gloom and doom. I was absorbing all of that. I just couldn't handle it. I didn't have the strength to push it away. And also because I didn't have any of my masks and my facade around me, I could actually feel the extent and the intensity of the fear and the gloom and doom and the division in the mainstream media as well as social media. So as much as I could, I kept away from it all. I did go onto YouTube to look at what people were saying about this particular virus and how to manage it, because I wanted to be prepared. I wanted to know. I wanted to know if my symptoms matched what other people were saying. And so I found YouTube to be a resource for me to get unbiased opinions about this particular virus. And then about 1 week into it, it was about April 6th, I started to feel a little bit better. I felt a bit stronger from the fatigue. but I started to get a slight dull ache right about here, around my chest area. This could be around my bronchus area. But because I was feeling so much better, I felt I had so much more energy, I thought, oh, okay, so maybe this was the mild COVID-19 that I had got. And I was quite happy with that. And that was the time that I started to say, through my will, that I am recovering from COVID-19. It was very rare that I said to anybody, oh, I'm struggling with COVID-19. No, I always said to everyone throughout the entire time I was ill that I am recovering from COVID-19. And it started on around April 6th when I started to feel better from the fatigue. And my fever had gone down. I was also sitting up a lot more. I was able to come down to the living room and sit and continue watching my Gilmore Girls. But again, I needed to not speak to very many people because I was still in a very vulnerable state. And we had a conversation with one person during this time, and this person brought up the fact that around that period, CNN had announced that the CDC had projected that between 60,000 to 200,000 people would die of COVID-19. When you're in such a vulnerable state, that amount of fear hits you. And that just pulls you down and it weakens you. So it was after that particular conversation, I sort of lapsed again because I was just pulled down. So that was when my husband and I really became very strict about who I come into contact with, who I talk with while I was so ill, so vulnerable, and so exposed. And then it was April 7th, the night of April 7th, I remembered waking up in the middle of the night because I needed to go to the bathroom. And to my horror, when I took a breath, when I was conscious that I took a breath, my lungs hurt. I felt like there was a vice on the top part of my lungs and at the bottom part of my lungs, and it wouldn't expand. It hurt for my lungs to expand. So this was the first time I felt fear, abject fear, because breathing is something that we do unconsciously. It's life. Breath is life. And to find myself hurting so badly while I was breathing, to feel it hurt for my lungs to expand, was very, very frightening. And also, I found it very interesting because my body knew exactly what it needed the whole time I was ill. That little voice in my tummy was the voice of my physical body and the wisdom of my physical body. And it knew exactly what it needed at every point. So at this time, I woke my husband up and he came and I said to him, darling, I need more oxygen. So we either need to go to the hospital or you need to do some AVT for me to bring down some oxygen. So just to touch upon what AVT is, we teach a course called Advanced Vibrational Training for the New Plane. And as part of this course, we teach people how to harness the pure high vibrational energy from all the elements that are available to us, especially from the earth. Oxygen is an element that is available to us, and so we can use these AVT techniques to draw the high vibrational energy from the air into the body. And so what I would suggest to anybody who don't have access to these alternate energy modalities, At this point, I would recommend to you to go to the hospital, because at this point, my body said it needed oxygen. So had I not had the ABT, I would have gone to the hospital. But my husband and I had a chat, and we decided that ABT was the way to go. And so he brought the oxygen into my body, and I felt so much better. I felt my lungs expand. I was so much more at ease. The other thing that helped me was that I was laying on my tummy. I laid prone. This is because most of the lung action and expansion happens behind. And so when you're laying on your back, it inhibits that expansion. But when you're laying on your tummy, it actually it makes it a lot easier for the lungs to expand and contract. So when your lungs are already having problems with expansion and contraction, this was the best way and the most comfortable way I found to sleep the whole time I was in this period where my lungs hurt. So that night, after my husband had brought down some ABT oxygen for me, I slept, and I woke up the next morning. And my husband and I had a conversation about going to the hospital. And we made a choice that no matter what happens, I actually wanted to stay at home. The reason for this is because I had access to ABT. We live in the country, lots of greens. I could choose what I could eat. We were living in a very energetically clean environment. And it felt like my body's wisdom was telling me exactly what I needed to do at any point in time. My body's wisdom was also telling me what to eat, how much to eat. And who to call, who to talk to as well. So I totally relied on the wisdom of my body and also the ABT. But it was also a choice where I chose to have a quality of life versus quantity of life. This may make a lot of people feel very uncomfortable because, saving a life and being alive is within our consciousness, within our belief system, within our conditioning, is the most important thing. However, when I was very young, I witnessed my grandmother going through quite a hard journey when she became sick. I've only ever known one grandparent, and she was very dear to me. And when she started to decline, she was kept alive, but I think for about two years or 1 year while she was being kept alive, she would be screaming in agony. She would be screaming to God to take her. She would be fed through a tube. She was really struggling and really suffering. And so when I witnessed this, my heart broke, because I thought to myself, this is no life. This is not life. This is not life that I want to lead. So it was that moment when I was quite cognizant about choosing quality of life as opposed to quantity. It doesn't matter how long I live, as long as I live a happy, productive life. So this was the conversation I'd had with Andy, my husband, and we both agreed that should anything happen to me during this time, it doesn't matter what happens to me, I'll stay at home where I'm loved and where I'm happiest at. So that Wednesday, I felt that my lungs had relaxed a little bit. And again, I felt like I was getting better and I was happy. But then Thursday comes along, and I remembered taking a shower, and I couldn't breathe again in the shower. It was very, very hard to breathe, and my lungs started to hurt. It was at this point again that I cried, because it felt like this disease was a little bit like a psychopath. it hits you, then you feel better and you think you're coming out of it, and then you dip down again, you decline again, and then you sort of clamber and claw your way up, and then you go down again. And every time it felt to me like I had hope, it hit me, and it hit me worse. So my symptoms were getting worse every time I felt I was getting better. So I actually felt like I was being tortured by a psychopath at this point. So I cried. I was also very lucky because this day was a birthday of one of my closest friends in the world. She's a medical doctor and she's in Malaysia, but we've known each other since we were 13 years old. And we went through everything together, boyfriends, university, marriages, everything. We grew up together, and all the pertinent milestones we went through together. So it was so interesting because I called her and I took a breath to sing happy birthday to her, but instead I burst into tears. And she asked me what was wrong, and I told her I have COVID-19. And it was such a blessing for me. She's been such a blessing for me because she's a doctor, so she knows as much as anyone could about COVID-19. And what I really admired about her is that she could preserve my dignity, but give me support and strength. When I talk about preserving my dignity, she respected my choices. She didn't push her agenda on me. I knew that she was scared, but she did say to me, the only thing she said to me was, Rina, promise me, when you feel like you get shortness of breath, go to the hospital. And I said, okay, because it was a choice. She didn't order me to do it. She didn't put her fears on me. She just held space for me. And there are very, very few people in the world who will love you enough to preserve your dignity and hold space for you while you're going through something very difficult. And I was so blessed that she was one of them. Plus, I was also asking her some questions from a medical perspective, and she was she gave me very deliberate, very thoughtful answers. They were not mired in fear. They were not mired in rhetoric. They were very thoughtful, and it was something that I really appreciated. I was also telling her how I was breathing. So just to go back a little bit, because I'd forgotten to mention this earlier, on Wednesday, the day after I felt that constriction in my lungs, I had this Facebook message that popped up about how a medical doctor was telling those who have COVID to breathe. And basically it was all about expanding the lungs. So take a deep breath and hold it for about 5 seconds and then breathe out. Do this 4 times, and on the 5th time take a deep breath, hold it for 5 seconds and cough. And what this does is it just allows the lungs to expand, and it just expels anything that is stuck in the lung respiratory area. So on Wednesday I was doing this very religiously. Now I'm also very fortunate because I am a singer. And as a singer, I've been trained to engage all of my lungs when I sing. So I could call on that skill to actually help me with COVID. Because the shallow breathing that we normally do just from the top of the lungs, it wouldn't help to get the amount of oxygen needed inside. Even breathing using the diaphragm didn't help me very much. I couldn't get enough oxygen. But what did help me was the true expansion of my lungs, which is the chest breathing, the diaphragm breathing, and also the expansion at the back. So if you notice my arms, if I'm holding just the top part of my rib cage, and if I take a breath, you can see my arms expanding because all of my lungs is completely expanded. And then breathing out, you can see that my hands are contracting because every single bit of air in my lungs have come out. This was the only type of breathing that helped me while I was going through this time, because this was the only type of breathing that got me enough oxygen to sustain me in between the AVT healings that my husband was giving to me. So I was telling my friend, the doctor, about this, and she says that is the best thing to do because according to, that is that is what physios do to people who have respiratory problems, is that they get them to strengthen their lungs by doing that exercise, especially with that contraction where you have to blow quite strongly into this bit of plastic, and a ball sort of goes up and down depending on how much air you can blow out of. I didn't have the contraption. I just had my singing training of lung extensions, and she said that's absolutely fine, and she asked me to do that as well. The other thing that totally helped me during this time was to be totally mindful and present, because breathing wasn't a subconscious activity anymore. It was a very conscious activity. And so I was very mindful of breathing. I was very mindful of how much air I was bringing into my body. And I was very mindful of how my lungs were working. And so this entire period taught me how to be very mindful and to be very present. Also during this time, I stayed in bed the whole time. The fatigue had come back, and it was just better for me to be in bed. And so basically my husband did everything for me. I will talk to you more about what he did later on in the video, but I just wanted to preface it by saying that what he did for me was the epitome of service and sacrifice, because he did everything for me without one complaint. He cooked for me. He brought the food up every day, 3 times a day. He brought me snacks. He went and did the shopping. I mean, he took care of everything. The only thing I had to take care of is my own hygiene and consumption of water and food. But other than that, he did everything for me. And this is also on top of what he had to do in terms of our workshops and trainings, because obviously because of the lockdown, we had to cancel all our workshops, and he was working with all the different students, sort of sending all the deposits back and communicating with them about what was going to happen with the workshops. So my husband was very, very busy, but he was still there for me 100%. So it was amazing what he did. But we'll talk more about that later. So this was Thursday, the 9th. Thursday, that evening, I had an interview scheduled by my publishers for the launch of my second book, The Magdalene Lineage. And to prepare for it, my husband again propped me up with a lot of AVT energy and I had the energy to actually do the interview. And obviously I was interviewed by a lovely gentleman called Keith, and so it was just so much fun. It was like having a cup of tea, really, and having a chat with a friend. So that made it very, very easy for me to have the interview as well. And all that was only possible because of two things. Number one was because of what Andy had done for me energetically to prop me up. And it was almost like I was plugged to an outsized battery source. And so obviously when I took the battery source off, I sort of declined again. But the second reason is also because of Keith and just the wonderful interviewer he was. And so the next day I felt very tired. So again, I spent all day in bed and I was watching TV. And about 10 o'clock that night, my husband comes in to say good night. And he took the dogs with him to sleep. And I remember very clearly that I turned my light off to go to sleep. And that voice in my belly said to me, Reena, if you close your eyes now, you will not open them again. That was when I realized that this was the end for me. And then I went through what I would call a near-death experience. And I will be talking more about this near-death experience as through a webinar, because obviously this is very personal for me. I didn't want this particular information to be made public on YouTube, but it also ties in a lot with the soul and divine consciousness and all of that. So if anyone is interested in learning more about soul, what happened to me in my near-death experience, if anyone wants to learn a little bit more about the divine consciousness, then all you have to do is click that link below to register for a webinar that I shall be running about my near-death experience. But for the purposes of this video, it suffices to say that during my experience, I was given a choice of either to live or leave. And I chose to live. The reasons why I chose to live, I shall divulge in that webinar. Obviously, came as a surprise to me. And I remember turning the light on to check the time, and it was about 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning. And I just was reflecting on what had happened. But that was the first time that I felt confident that I was going to get through COVID-19. The next morning, my husband comes and I told him about what had happened. And it was the first time that I felt his strength falter. And which is, it's fair enough. It was a really intense time for him. It was a really intense time for me. And, it was shocking to hear someone you love say this, especially when it is so unexpected. So at this point, I felt a little bit shaky because at this point he was my main source of strength, and he'd had a shock, and so that strength wasn't there as much anymore. So I sent an SOS text message, I sent an SOS email to some friends of ours in the US, Beth and Gary, and I said, I need help. Can we please talk? And I think they heard or felt something in the energy of the email I had sent, and they responded immediately. Andy told them exactly what had happened, and they started to send me the AVT energy that I needed so desperately, the oxygen and the strength. And they were also there to sort of talk to Andy, which he needed as well. This gave Andy a break to basically recoup, and he could then come back full strength to just help me through this again. And then it took me a few days that I was lying in bed, and again I felt like I was getting better, and it was a Monday when it all went downhill again. This time I felt that there was this red hot poker around my heart chakra or lung area, and it literally felt like someone had taken a hot poker and was just burning it through my chest. To this day, I'm not really sure what it is. The doctors couldn't help me with it either. I suspect it could be a number of things. Like, first thing was, while I was getting slightly better, Andy would help me walk down to the bottom of our garden, where we have this amazing view of the fields, but it was also quite polleny. So I actually think that my lungs couldn't, my system, my respiratory system couldn't handle the pollen, and that my lungs reacted in that way because they were already so weak. So that was one. The second thing was, while I was in this condition, we have a neighbor with whom who has been trying to sell us a little piece of the land at the bottom of our garden. Runs from our garden all the way down to the bottom. And we couldn't agree on a price. And during this time, he sent a really nasty email, basically saying that, he's offering us to buy the land one last time. If not, he would put a big fence that runs right along the garden, which would hurt our view of the immense countryside that we have. And he said he'd put a shed down there as well. It was a very nasty email, and I could feel the nasty energy in this email because I was in a very vulnerable state, and it totally hit me here, again in my heart chakra. So I was laid up again, just trying to get over this heart chakra, this red hot poker in my lungs. And around this time as well, I started to get a really tight headache. Like, I felt like the vice had moved from my lungs to my head, and that it was pressing quite strongly in my head. And that could possibly be because I was really upset with this particular email. But then I was also, my gastrointestinal system wasn't working so well. The whole time I was ill, I could eat a lot. But this time, I'd lost my appetite. And I remembered one of the things my friend said, the one who's a doctor, she said, Rina, no matter what, you have to eat. So even when I felt nauseous and I felt like I had zero appetite, I forced myself to eat because my body was going through a war and it needed fuel. And I got fuel through the food, and I also got fuel through the shows I was watching, and I was getting fuel through the few people I was interacting with. But it was so interesting how one email with a really nasty agenda, with a really nasty intent, completely made me crumble. But it also taught me about people's intentions, about people's emotions. It taught me about how, if I had had my defenses up, as I normally would have, it wouldn't have affected me. But here, everything was down. I was so weak and so exposed and so vulnerable that the energy hit me like a 10-ton truck. So it just taught me about being in a state of being and just being aware of the sort of energy we put out, the sort of emotion we put out, and how it can impact people, especially those who are very ill, especially those who are vulnerable, especially babies and children who haven't had the time to put on a defense system, to just be very aware of that. So, all in all, it took me I was in bed for nearly 8 weeks when I couldn't move around very much, apart from the 3 days I went down to the bottom of the garden to actually get some air. After that, I started to feel a little stronger, and I then managed to come down to the living room. And when I came down to the living room, for me that was a win, because 8 weeks I was in bed. And I spent about 2 weeks just art journaling. I filled out 2 books of art journaling because it allowed me to still be floaty and flighty, and but I could still do something. There was still movement. I could, the prana, the energy could flow in a very, very gentle way while I was watching some very light TV as well. So that happened towards the end of May and the first week of June. And I couldn't go anywhere near my computer. I couldn't do any work. Even up to this day, I'm finding it a little bit difficult to work at the pace that I used to. I don't think I'll ever work at that pace again. I have learned my lesson because, the burnout was a big part of me being so thoroughly affected by this. But obviously there is a second reason, and we'll talk about that during my webinar. All I can say is that going through this experience has transformed me very, very deeply. And life is not the same for me anymore. It's very different, and I will share more about this in my webinar. So what made me strong during this time? My main source of strength was my husband. He gave everything of himself to me. And I am so grateful for that, because I couldn't survive without him. I know that. He, like I said, he cooked for me, he spoke to me. When I was feeling scared, he held me. When I needed extra energy, he AVT'd it. He would sit next to me and I would absorb the energy. His energy. He's a very strong person. I'm very fortunate to have such a strong person as my husband. He was totally there for me. He was very loving, he was very caring, and he gave me everything. It was just the ultimate act of service and sacrifice. And I am so grateful to my husband for this. Sorry. The second source of strength for me were the friends that I was talking to you about. My friend in Malaysia, the medical doctor, she was checking up on me. She was making sure, she kept tracking my progress based on what I would say, how I would say it, and she always did it conversationally. But I felt that she was listening. She was very in tune with me. She was always listening for signs that I didn't know I was giving. So her being there was amazing. Then there was Gary and Beth, who were there when Andy was crumbling a little bit. They were, it didn't matter that they were in the US. It didn't matter that Jayanti was in Malaysia. Distance didn't matter. They were there. They were present. they were a source of strength for me. And I really, really appreciated this. Then I had my girls who helped me with my social media marketing. They kept things going for me when I couldn't even lift a pinky finger. And Sonia, who helped me with marketing as well, she helps me too. I mean, they just kept everything going from a business perspective, so the business didn't crumble. To me, that was a source of strength because it gave me peace. I didn't feel like I needed to rush and I needed to get better to hold the business up. The business was running because of Kirsty and Lou from Moku Communications. Thank you, ladies, and for Sonia. So that was very important for me. Then when some people heard that I was ill, they came to me to offer some support, and I really appreciated that as well. They called and they spoke to me and they checked up on me, and that was a big deal for me. I didn't tell people that I was ill. It was just that if someone asked me to do something, then I was honest with them. I would say, look, I can't do it because I have COVID. And some of the people felt how badly some of the people felt how severely I was going through it. There was Liana, Iwana, Sanya. They knew how badly I was going through it, and I could feel them hovering around, just thinking about me and just sort of holding space for me, even if they didn't talk to me. And that, I really appreciated that. That was another source of strength for me. So, and then obviously there was my publisher. They had organized some interviews for me during this time, and I had to cancel an interview because I was just so sick. At this point, my lungs were inflamed and I couldn't do much. So I actually emailed the interviewer, who was very, very kind and very gentle, and said, yeah, that's fine. Take your time, get better. We will interview you later. But I also copied my publisher, and oh my goodness, the loving note I got from my publisher to say, take your time, get better, don't worry about this, a book is for life, when you get better, we can start working on it. I mean, to get a note from my publisher about that also gave me so much peace and so much relief, because I felt like I could take my time to get better as opposed to feeling the pressure to meet a deadline. So to have a source of support for your work and for your personal space is so important to get strength while we're going through this. The important thing about the support system I had around me during this time, again, and I shall repeat this again, is that they never pushed their belief system on me. They never forced me to go to the hospital. They never forced me to do this or do that or eat this or eat that. They were just there. They were preserving my dignity, and they were giving me the energy, and they were holding space for me, while my body, while the wisdom of my body was telling me exactly what it needed to get better. And the support system helped facilitate my body to get exactly what it needed. The other source of strength I got was real information, helpful information. I would look at mainstream media, and the only thing mainstream media was talking about was how many people were dying and how horrible the symptoms were. And how much more horrible the symptoms could get. I didn't need that. To me, that was all fear-based, and it just made me feel weaker. And like I said, I would go onto social media, and the only thing I would see is these battles between to be vaccinated or not vaccinated, to be masked or not masked, to be in lockdown or not lockdown. Again, everything was outrage and telling off and fear. Everything was fear-based. Again, nothing there that applied to me. The only real information I got were from people who had gone through it or who were going through it themselves. How to breathe was something that I got from someone who had gone through it. Sleeping in a prone position where you're sleeping on your tummy is something else that I got from someone who had gone through it. And then I had a gift. I did get strength from someone who was the light for me. So this person as well was someone I met on my like a hobby Facebook group, and she wrote on her post that she was just getting over COVID and she wanted something around that hobby to make her feel better. I had something I could potentially give her. So I messaged her back and I said, hey, so I've got this. If you like it, you can have it. And she then went on to say, we started to message one another, and she went on to say that she was a nurse for the NHS, the National Health Service in the UK, and she had contracted COVID because she worked in the emergency department. Apparently, it made her very ill for 2 weeks, but she got better, and then she said, I'm going back to work. And I thought, whoa, I'm going through this at the moment. I wouldn't put myself where I had got it in the first place. Not that I knew where I had got it in the first place, but she did. And I thought, and I messaged her and I said, oh my goodness, you are so strong and amazing. She goes, well, yeah, it's work. And I want to go and help people because I've gone through it. So I want to help people go through it as well because I understand it better. So to me, she was the epitome of the light. She didn't talk to me about the light. She was the light. And she gave me so much strength because I thought, right, I can be like you. I can beat this. I can get over it. I'm not sure when I'm going to get over it, but I can do this. So she was a really big source of strength as well. And it's interesting how the universe works because of synchronicity, because she saw my name, Reena Kumarasingam. She asked me, are you an author by any chance? And I said, oh yes, I'd written this book. She says, is your book called Shrouded Truth? And I thought, yeah, that's my first book. So she had been reading Shrouded Truth while she wasn't feeling so well, and also while she was in the hospital. So it's so fascinating how the universe just brings the right people to you at the right time. And she was one of my sources of strength. Amazing, amazing lady. And then this particular source of strength may come as a shock to people, but I remember it was a very, very dark day for me. I think it was one of the days when I was having trouble breathing, and I had the hot poker in my chest. And again, I was looking for some ray of hope somewhere, and I couldn't find any. And I get random tweets coming on my phone from whether or not I follow them. I just get these random tweets. And sometimes they come in Arabic, and sometimes it's about a topic that I'm really not interested in as well. But at that day, I got a tweet, and it said, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. And it was a message that I needed at the right time. And the person the tweet had come from was President Trump. And I drew so much strength from that tweet, because I was so weak. I was in a dark place, and all I needed to hear is that there is hope, there is light. And so it helped me be focused on the light at the end of the tunnel, as opposed to the darkness around me. And the next day came another tweet from Mr. Trump, and it said, "The curve is flattening." And that gave me so much relief, because when I was also quite ill, and you look at social media where everyone is saying, flatten the curve, hospitals are getting overwhelmed, all these fear-based things, I felt fearful as well, because I thought, oh no, if I decline anymore, I won't be able to get the treatment that I need from the hospitals. So I didn't have that safety net because of all this fear that was coming out of the mainstream media and social media. But when I got that tweet that said the curve is flattening, I didn't care at that point if it was real, if it was honest, if it was true. That didn't matter to me. At that point, it gave me relief, and it helped me let go and say, okay, if I get worse, I can get more help. That was all that meant to me, and that gave me strength. So these two tweets from President Trump really helped me. And I remember telling my friend about this from Malaysia, and she was like, really? And she says, okay, as long as it's helping you. And I said, babes, these two tweets, they really helped me too. So don't judge where the strength is coming from. Accept wherever the strength is coming from, just accept it. And I did, with so much gratitude. Obviously, I was getting a lot of strength from the AVT energy, the AVT techniques and healings that Andy was sending to me, as well as my two friends, Beth and Gary. The oxygen really sustained me. If I hadn't had that, I would have gone to hospital because I just needed some oxygen. But I didn't need it because of the AVT. And obviously the other main source of strength I was getting from was the wisdom of my body. The wisdom of my body knew exactly what and who it needed to heal, and what and who it needed to stay far, far away from. So this was about, that, and I stayed away from the mainstream media a lot. I was staying away from social media, apart from YouTube. The sort of shows I chose to watch was very important as well. Obviously, the shows of war and these historical epics didn't work for me. The lighter shows, the dramedies, worked really, really well for me. Comedies, I watched the whole 10 seasons of Friends. Really helped me get through this as well. I mean, it was very light, it was silly, it was fun, it was touching. So, shows like that really helped me. The sort of books I could read, I was reading very, very light books. I couldn't absorb educational books. I couldn't absorb educational information. My mind wasn't ready for that. My body wasn't ready for that. So the wisdom of my body also knew exactly what I needed to eat. I was eating a lot of basil because it had a lot of iron, a lot of magnesium, a lot of vitamin K. The iron was needed for my blood. I was eating a lot of red meat really helped me. Oily fish really helped me because, again, I needed as much iron as possible to produce as much hemoglobin as possible to enable my body to get as much oxygen as possible into my body. I needed foods that gave me a lot of energy. So I was eating a lot of pasta. I was eating a lot of grains because that was giving my body energy to fight this virus. I mean, it felt like a war zone. I was also eating a lot of tomatoes, and I had a lot of orange juice because my body was craving vitamin C the whole time. My body completely rejected sugars. I couldn't have any processed food because my energy just plummeted. I remember there was this once when, Andy looked a little bit tired. So I said to Andy, why don't we just put a frozen pizza in the oven and just heat it up, and I'll have that and he'll have that. That was a bad idea because it completely zapped me of my energy. It didn't help one bit. It made me feel even worse. So my body knew exactly what it needed to sustain itself. It knew exactly how much sunshine to get. My body just knew everything. So my body was also a source of strength. So in this case, if you know someone who's going through it, or if you are going through it yourself, just make sure that you listen to your body, trust your body. This is your body's battle, and your body knows more than any other part of you, knows more than your mind, knows more than your emotion. So just listen to that wisdom of your body. Also, the other thing that gave me strength was crying. Like I said, when I first felt the constriction of my lungs, when it hurt, I cried. And then I cried some more a few days later, and I cried some more. Every time I dipped, I cried. And I remember my friend who called me, I cried on her birthday. And I felt so much better. I felt so much better having expressed myself. I felt so much better having cried. And because clearly I was releasing a lot of emotions during that time. I was feeling fear, I was feeling sadness, I was feeling confusion. So just being able to express that to some people, to someone, is so important. And my husband was a phenomenal source of strength as I expressed myself. And obviously, my friend from Malaysia was someone I could express myself to as well. And that was so helpful because it cleared stuff from my system. It cleared a lot of things from my system. It made me reflect a lot about my life as well, and how I would like to live my life too. So I will be covering this a little bit more in the webinar because, obviously that was a big part of it. But it was a time where releasing as much emotion as possible was also very strengthening. So, how do you support someone who's going through this? The first thing I would suggest is to just be strong. Not an ideological strength, because that's not real strength. That's like some sort of, it's up here. It's not grounded in reality. Real strength is what my husband has, or, how my friends supported me. They were real. It was grounded. I could feel it. It was very, very anchored, and I could draw on. I was absorbing it like virtually a parasite, because I needed it. I wasn't giving anything back. I was just absorbing as much as I could. But it came from a really anchored, grounded strength. And I think being honest about whether we can give that strength is really important, because if we feel like we don't have that strength to give, then find a support group to support who's going through COVID-19. Take turns giving strength, because I'm telling you right now that I have never felt so weak in my entire life, and that strength helped sustain me. Because I had zero in my battery, I had to just absorb. And it was just going towards fighting the COVID-19 that I needed more and more and more. any form of negativity is not helpful. It is not strength giving. Any form of impressing your own agenda or impressing your fear on the patient who's going through it is not strength giving, because that is about your fear. It is not about what they are going through. And they are so weak that they cannot take your fear as well. So it's about leaving your fear out the door, coming to the patient, being grounded and rooted in your strength, and then going out, take that fear and express it to someone else. Because I am telling you, the patient cannot handle anyone else's fears, anyone else's weaknesses, anyone else's agenda. It will keep pulling them down. The second thing that I needed was hope as well. So just come with hope. Be the light. It's like that nurse who told me that she'd gone through it and she was going back to work to help other people. To me, that gave me a lot of hope and something to aspire to. Oh, it's like my husband coming in every day with some food, telling me, regaling me with funny stories, or my friends who were regaling me with stories, or my medical friend. If you have any medical knowledge, it's best to tell the patient that it takes a while to get better, because I was seeing people getting better in a week or 2 weeks, and I wasn't getting better in this short time. But my friend did say it can take more than 4 weeks, and I relaxed because it gave me hope. I thought, all right, I can do this, I don't have to pressure myself to get better in 2 weeks to live, So having information like that to give people real hope is so important. Arming yourself with information about how to help people in a real way, the breathing, the eating, the shows, that is so important as well, because all that was needed was hope. The third thing to do, and this is very hard, is to not push your belief system or your fears again onto the patient. There is no defense. There is absolutely no defense, so they can't push back. So if their body wisdom is asking them to do something or is guiding them to do something, the body wisdom is the best navigation platform that they have, because their body wisdom is very different from your body wisdom. They may need different types of food from you, for example. So just give them the dignity to make these choices for themselves. Give them the dignity to enable them to explore themselves as well. My body wisdom was very sharp and quite strong, but that's only because I trust it. So enable somebody to trust their body wisdom as well. And the fourth thing is to be honest with yourself. If you do not have the strength to hold space for them, if it gets too intense for you, because it is a very intense time, call on someone else to help. It's okay. It's not that you're a failure. In fact, you are doing more for the person going through it if you are honest about it, and you are getting a support group going because you feel you don't have the strength for it. You're doing them a service, because that also is a sacrifice. So just be honest with how much strength you can give, or that you're prepared to give for the person who is going through it. So a lot of people are also asking me how I'm feeling now, about 4 months after getting COVID-19. I can say I'm not 100% there yet, but I am getting stronger. One of the things that helped me get stronger is doing yoga. So when I felt like I was able to walk and do things in an active way, I felt like I needed my energy to move. And because I was laid out in bed for so long in a static position, or I was just doing art journaling in a relatively static position, I felt like my energy wasn't moving. And I decided to do yoga, which is a very interesting choice for me, because before COVID-19 I couldn't stand doing yoga. I found that it was far too still, and I liked exercise with a lot of movement. So I liked to either run, or I used to walk uphill a lot, or I used to swim. But none of those exercises called to me. Yoga did. And the one thing that drew me to yoga was the stillness, but also the breath work. So I did a 30-day challenge on using some videos on YouTube to try and get my strength back up, and that's been very helpful. It's definitely helped me with my breathing. It's helping me with my focus. It's helping me strengthen all those muscles that were probably wasting away while I was just laying in bed. So the other thing that also helped me as I was getting better was when my body's intuition wanted my husband to pat me on the back as I coughed. When I spoke to my medical friend about this, she said that that is another physiotherapy technique for people who've gone through respiratory problems, because it's just a way to help the lungs release fragments and remnants that's no longer needed in the lungs. So when that happened, she was quite pleased, because she says, I'm well on my path to recovery. I hope that these tips to help strengthen someone who's going through COVID-19 and to provide strength to someone who's going through COVID-19 has been helpful. And if you have gone through COVID-19, or if you have experienced or you've taken care of anybody who's had COVID-19, and you have any extra tips and techniques to share, please feel free to just put them in the comments below. I'd love to hear more. Everything that I've shared is about my experience, but I would love to hear how you have helped to manage this, so that if anyone ever contacts me who is going through COVID-19, there is a ready-made database to help them. If anybody would like to know more about AVT, please feel free to visit my website www.reenakumarasingham.com. I shall place a link below to AVT, to both the training that we do and the therapy that we provide. This is to just give you more information about what it is all about. And for my YouTube friends and family, I just want you to know that COVID-19 has had a huge impact on me. And I am not sure if I am going to be doing as many videos as I have in the past. But as long as you subscribe to my channel, just know that you will be getting notifications whenever I put a video up. And I want to thank you all for your support, and thank you all for your well wishes. And I will see you either at the webinar, where I will share my experiences of my near-death experience, or I will see you in the next video. Thank you.